Thank you, Mr. Saburi, and thank you so much, Mr. Pottinger, for your insightful remarks. And we are very lucky to have Mr. Pottinger here at the RIETI BPL. My name is Masahiko UCHINO. I'm Principal Deputy Director of Americas Division of METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. I'm so honored and thrilled to serve as a commentator for Mr. Pottinger today. And I understand that my role here today is to bring out more insights of Mr. Pottinger and make the audience more familiar with him. So but a little bit about myself. As I used to work for the Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C. From 2018 to 2021, so I know his name since then. And also, after returning to Tokyo, I had opportunities to meet with Mr. Pottinger as I participated in meetings between him and the METI senior officials in the past. And I have been always impressed by Mr. Pottinger's extensive knowledge and deep insights related to U.S. foreign policy and the U.S. China relationship. He's also skillful to apply his knowledge into specific cases and give us valuable advice how to navigate the complexities of international affairs given U.S. foreign policy priorities. In the current geopolitical climate, I think Mr. Pottinger's guidance is more essential than ever. President Trump has been so energetic in foreign policy areas since November, even November of last year, before he was inaugurated. And he hasn't slowed down yet. And President Trump has set a new tone for U.S. foreign policy, which significantly influences global dynamics. It was fortunate that Japan was one of the earliest countries to hold an in-person summit meeting with President Trump. And building on personal relationship nurtured between the leaders, Japan has to deal with various topics with the Trump administration. And as one of many people who follow what is going on in Washington, D.C., and what are announced by the Trump administration and what President Trump talks day after day, it is quite challenging for us, at least for me, to be always kind of mindful of long-term goals of President Trump and the Trump administration, because so many things happen in a speedy manner and in unprecedented ways. That is why I believe that it is important for us to step back and look big picture, and so that we can better understand the underlying mechanisms and foundational goals of Trump administration. And Mr. Pottinger's remarks about the three key concepts starting from R is very helpful in that sense. And with that context in mind, I'd like to pose three questions to Mr. Pottinger. And first one is about the Trump administration's regional priorities, and second one is the regional economic architecture, and third one is about the U.S. China relationship. Let me start from the first question about the regional priorities. As Mr. Pottinger mentioned in the third pillar of his opening remarks about the real estate, President Trump has been so vocal about the Greenland and Panama Canal issue, and we are wondering what's the priority of the regions of the President Trump and Trump administration, and we are interested in where the East Asia is located in his sort of priorities, and what's the kind of the goals of the East Asia. As Mr. Pottinger touched in his in the end of his opening remarks about the Taiwan. So even it is very critical, we are wondering where it's located in the regional priorities of President Trump and the Trump administration.
Uchino-san, thank you. if you look at President Trump's inaugural address just a few weeks ago, he mentioned only 3 countries in that speech. He mentioned Mexico, he mentioned Panama, and he mentioned China, but his mention of China was in the context of Panama Canal. So I think that's a useful reminder that President Trump's focus is very much on the Western Hemisphere. It's on the Americas. And President Trump is someone who believes in the Monroe Doctrine. This was a doctrine put forth by President James Monroe back in 1823. And the Monroe Doctrine stated, in essence, that European powers, distant foreign powers, must not meddle in the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, in the Caribbean. And in return, the United States would not meddle with the longstanding interests of those European colonial powers. And so President Trump is someone who has consciously embraced the Monroe Doctrine. He used to talk about it during his first term. He's talked about it in other contexts. And so what I think he's seeking to do, first and foremost, is reassert American primacy in the Western Hemisphere. Now, you can see that in things like his first tariffs being focused on Mexico and Canada as he tries to get control on the drug trade flowing into the United States. He also put tariffs on China, which provides all of the precursor chemicals that feed into the drug cartels and their deadly trade that kills more than 70,000 Americans each year. He's already sent his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, on his first trip to Central America and to talk about Panama Canal, for example. He's had a call with the Prime Minister of Denmark to try to pressure Denmark into relinquishing sovereignty over Greenland. So this is clearly his priority. His regional priority is the Western Hemisphere. Now, what do we know then about his priority with respect to Europe, the Middle East, and the Western Pacific? I think it's too early to say, but what we're seeing is an interesting mix of policies. In the Middle East, President Trump is reasserting the maximum pressure campaign that he had pursued against Iran in the first term. He's looking to cut Iranian oil exports in order to bring Iran to the table to negotiate an end to its ambitions to pursue nuclear arsenal. Most of the progress on enriching uranium to build atomic weapons occurred during just the last 4 years. And so President Trump is trying to reverse that trend line. As mentioned earlier, he's also active now in Gaza. So he's not retreating or retrenching from the Middle East. In Europe, he has negotiators currently seeking to achieve a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. I think the world would welcome a ceasefire, but of course it would have to be a durable ceasefire. And I suspect that Vladimir Putin is not seeking a durable ceasefire. I think he's seeking to try to conquer all of Ukraine. I think that is the stated goal of many of his key advisors. And so this is going to be a very difficult negotiation. And it's going to be one that will be informed more than anything, not by diplomacy, but by facts on the ground. If Ukraine can continue to resist and effectively repel efforts by Russia to penetrate deeper into Ukraine, that will create more leverage for Ukraine to achieve a durable ceasefire. there will have to be some kind of a credible, real, visible security guarantee by Ukraine's friends in Europe and in the United States if a ceasefire is to hold. I think that will mean that European troops will have to move into Ukraine in order to enforce a ceasefire if we achieve one. And then you have Taiwan. Like I mentioned, what happens with Taiwan will be the single most important determinant of whether President Trump is a successful president or a failure on the order of a 1929-style Great Depression. So President Trump, in this first term, I had many conversations with him about Taiwan. I think he understands how important Taiwan is to America's national security, how important a peaceful status quo is to American prosperity and national security and that of the world. And so I remain hopeful that he maintains a firm position with respect to Taiwan's status, one that allows only for peaceful, non-coercive resolution of Taiwan's status between the people of Taiwan and the non-democratic regime in Beijing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pottinger, for sharing your thoughts. And so, like moving to like my next question, it's related to the your second concept that you spoke in the first in the beginning. It's about reindustrialization of the President Trump's the priority or key concept, and also it's related to East Asia. So President Trump's focus on the economic policy is more on the domestic revitalization of domestic industry, and so that is why his administration is trying to invite more foreign investment in the United States. But at the same time, we as Mr. Pottinger mentioned a couple of times in his remarks, this region is very important for the economic security of the, the East Asia is very important for economic security of the United States as well. But at the same time, it seems that United States or the Trump administration, so there are possibilities like, some people said this administration is kind of little interest in kind of involving or engaging with the sort of multilateral frameworks, about like economy or economic cooperation. So we are wondering how we can get more engagement of the United States into this region in terms of the economic cooperation. What kind of the narratives or what kind of the agenda items can we develop with the current Trump administration to get more engagement from them, and what specific areas of collaboration do you see as promising?
Great. So Japan has a big opportunity, I think, to pick up where Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his successor, Prime Minister Suga, where they left off with President Trump in the first term, and expand on this concept that Prime Minister Ishiba has now picked up and put into the statement that he and President Trump put out together, and that is to pursue what they call a free and open Indo-Pacific. There are all sorts of variations and improvisations that could take place in advancing this idea of making sure that this part of the world is free and open, not one that is controlled and autocratic, but instead one that still recognizes the importance of sovereignty and stability. And so some of the formats that were used in the first Trump administration included the Quad. That was the quadrilateral meetings at the cabinet level between, there were several cabinet level meetings in the Trump administration between India and Japan, Australia and the United States. President Biden's team picked up and continued to run with that and actually elevated it to summit level. And there were several summit level meetings between the leaders of those four countries. I hope that President Trump picks up with that as well. He has a good relationship with Prime Minister Modi. He will develop a good relationship with Australia's Prime Minister Albanese, and he's off to a very good start, as we saw at the White House last week with Prime Minister Ishiba. So that's one format. I think there are others as well, depending on the issues, right? The United States and Japan worked very closely on trying to create standards for protecting trusted data flows in the first administration. That's even more important now in light of the fact that Beijing, over the last few years, now controls tightly Chinese data, does not let any data leave China, but it actively goes out to bring in private data from every other country in the world. So we need an alternative that's consistent with rule of law and our values. And Japan and the United States is a perfect bilateral starting point for that. And that can be expanded to include Europe and others. I think that areas where the U.S. and Japan can work with other countries to create new multilateral fora would include critical minerals, ensuring that we have secure supply chains that are not dependent on the People's Republic of China. Same thing for pharmaceuticals, same thing for energy, and we saw an agreement related to LNG emerge from the Ishiba-Trump summit last week. Biosecurity, extremely important. Remember that the several U.S. intelligence agencies have now drawn the conclusion that the COVID-19 pandemic began as a leak of a virus from a Chinese laboratory. According to The Economist magazine, roughly 30 million people are now dead from that accident in China. We need to have a much stronger degree of biosecurity cooperation between democratic allies and other partners that are willing to be good stewards of human security and human health. And that includes setting up networks for detecting pandemics before they're pandemics, detecting dangerous laboratory research, creating standards, and then punishing countries that pursue dangerous lab research that puts millions or billions of lives at risk. This is an area where I think Japan and the United States can break extremely important new ground. Artificial intelligence, the convergence of artificial intelligence with national security issues, including biology. EVs. President Biden, before he left office, banned Chinese electric vehicle technology from being imported into the United States. He basically banned Chinese EVs and said that even if China were to build EVs in the United States, China would not be able to have a controlling stake in those factories and would not be able to use Chinese technology for all the connectivity software. I think that was a very good move. I expect that President Trump will probably embrace that national security standard. But what it raises the question of is, I don't think it's going to be sufficient for the United States to have a unique standard for self-driving cars and for EVs that is unique only to the United States. We need to have a much larger common standard that is trusted, that is not Chinese, where the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to steal sensitive data and also create national security risks in our transportation. So that means Japan and the United States should work together towards a common acceptable standard for EVs, and then bring in Europe, bring in South Korea, and bring in many others. people tend to want to have security and trust in the things they own, including the automobile, which is a symbol of freedom, really, ever since it was invented a century ago. So those would be some areas where I think you'd have some opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Matt-san, for sharing your insights. And thank you for, we feel that there are potentials like the collaboration in the areas of critical and emerging technologies, as well as the working with the potential partners to expand the markets within the like-minded countries on the with the shared standards, shared rules. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for. It would be great for us to have good food for thoughts for us.
Thank you.
So, and leading to the third question, and my last question related to Matt-san, it's about U.S. China relationship. People are watching closely what will happen between the two countries, and of course there are so many rumors, so many analysis on the U.S. China relationship. But there's one story that that China would like to make a deal as early as possible. Because they don't want to see any additional tariffs from the United States. And there are some people said, the United States or the President Trump is also like to broker a deal with China in a few months or so. So do you think how do you see the potentials of the U.S. China deals, and how much realistic to seeing such deals in a few months, like in April or in May, and if it's not realistic, what kind of the timelines do you think more realistic for the two countries to to make a deal?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the sense I get is that President Trump is not seeking to have a more antagonistic relationship with Beijing at the outset of his presidency. He's seeking to communicate directly with Xi Jinping and through Xi Jinping's emissaries. He has stated that he wants to have a visit, either hosting Xi Jinping or President Trump visiting China sometime early in his administration. And I think that one of the reasons he's doing this is because he's trying to sequence his priorities, right? Strategy means that you have to prioritize, and right now he's prioritizing the Western Hemisphere. He's prioritizing trade globally, so tariffs. You've already seen tariffs imposed to punish China for the flow of fentanyl. You've seen tariffs on global steel and aluminum production. I expect next global tariffs on semiconductors, targeting every country in the world that makes semiconductors. I think that's coming soon. Pharmaceuticals is an area he's talked about. And he's also talked about this idea of reciprocal tariffs that I talked about at the very top of my remarks. So that is his priority, is a tariff policy, a new trade policy designed to try to drive investment into the United States to reindustrialize and to try to bring a greater semblance of balance in trade to the U.S. and its partners. There's also the domestic imperative that might be the number one imperative that he's pursuing, which is achieving government efficiency by almost rampaging through the U.S. government bureaucracy to find examples of waste, fraud, and abuse, to try to eliminate if the laws will permit it, you know, that's going to require changes to law to eliminate some government agencies. This is a major set of activities that President Trump campaigned on, and now he's moving forward with those actions. So for him to try to confront Beijing right out of the starting gate would be, I think in his mind, probably a tall order in light of all these other priorities that I just discussed. So it may be that there is a bit of a détente approach for the next at least several months. But ultimately, I don't believe that détente will be rewarded by Beijing, not because of any fault of President Trump or his administration, but because of the nature of Xi Jinping himself and the ambitions and goals that he's pursuing. If you read what Xi Jinping has been saying to his own system with regularity, it's clear that he is not seeking some kind of a nice, easy balance of power. He has explicitly rejected a balance of power with the United States. He has said explicitly that China's relations with Western countries are, quote, irreconcilable, close quote, and that it would therefore require a very contentious set of confrontations, some which will be, as Xi Jinping said, quote, extremely sharp confrontations. So Xi Jinping is really the one who's driving the direction of U.S. China ties and is the one who's driving much of the chaos that is happening around the world, and which was called out in the statement by Prime Minister Ishiba and President Trump in their first sentence when they referred to a violent and disorderly world. A violent and disorderly world. The violence and disorder has a, quote, decisive enabler causing that violence and disorder. And according to NATO, and I think they were right in making this statement last year, the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party regime, is the decisive enabler of the disorder and violence happening today in Europe with the war in Ukraine. China is also a decisive enabler of the Islamic Republic of Iran and is the main propaganda supporter, diplomatic supporter, and also economic supporter for Iran, even as Iran went on a rampage and inaugurated a seven-front war against Israel in late 2023. And it is Beijing that is threatening to overturn global security and prosperity with its threats to attack and annex Taiwan. So even though President Trump is pursuing a sequenced foreign policy that's first focusing more closely at home, I think that ultimately he will be forced, by no fault of his own, to have to deal with the realities of a violent and disorderly world, and that if he wants to achieve a golden era, like he outlined in his statement with Prime Minister Ishiba, and the golden era that he referred to in his inaugural address, he's going to have to do hard things to constrain Beijing's ambitions.
Thank you so much, Matt-san, for sharing your thoughts and views. Very helpful. Thank you. And now I pass the microphone to SABURI-san for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Uchino-san, for asking the several questions, and thank you very much, Matt, for covering all of them. And we will now proceed to our question and answer segment. Okay, so I'd like to take the first question concerning the China again. So your last topics. And the question says, how would you evaluate the power balance of a China policy between hardliners such as Rubio and Walz and pro-China Elon Musk? you are second. So maybe you know the
Sure.
tendency of the Prime Minister, the President Trump. So you can evaluate that what's going on in the black box.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, every administration has people who are more hardline and others who are more inclined to accommodate U.S. adversaries, and this administration will be no different. But President Trump is the one who will make foreign policy. It's his prerogative under the Constitution to make foreign policy, and I think that something that isn't widely known about President Trump is that he actually appreciates a very wide range of viewpoints when he's considering his policy options. I have been in many meetings in the Oval Office where you had a very hot debate between the president's advisors, including on the question of China and a whole host of other issues. President Trump likes to hear people make their best case for a range of different arguments before he decides ultimately on his course of action. So I don't think that the fact that there are some who are more hardline on China and some who are more softline will be determinative of President Trump's policy. I think President Trump is going to arrive at his own conclusion, taking on board all of their advice, but more than anything else, taking on board events in the world, many of which will be driven by Xi Jinping and by his fellow Axis members, Vladimir Putin, the Ayatollah of Iran, the tin pot dictator Nicolas Maduro down in Venezuela, and of course Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea. So this axis is the one according to Xi Jinping, when he visited with Vladimir Putin in March of 2022. I'm sorry, it was March of 2023. Xi Jinping said to Vladimir Putin, he was captured on video as he was leaving the Kremlin, he said, "There are changes occurring in the world that happen only once in a century, and you and I, Vladimir, are the ones driving that change." So President Trump, even in extending goodwill to these dictators, ultimately dictators are going to dictate. Dictators are going to be dictators. They're going to be violent. They're going to be aggressive. And when they are, President Trump will have to react and respond to that reality.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next question, was foreign policy. The question said, yesterday, Secretary Peter Hegas announced the return to Ukraine pre-2014 borders is unrealistic. President Trump suggested U.S. work to take Palestinian territory for an undefined period of time. What gives Japan hope that this will not encourage China to do the same on Taiwan?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, look, with respect to Ukraine, I just want to reiterate that there will not be a sustainable ceasefire unless there is a real, concrete, demonstrable security guarantee for Ukraine. And that's going to require troops on the ground from countries outside of Ukraine that are friendly to Ukraine coming in to enforce what could end up being something more like the North Korea, South Korea demilitarized zone, cutting through some portion of Ukraine's territory. So, look, Beijing has every intention of annexing Taiwan. It has stated its intention to unify Taiwan on what appears to be a more urgent timeline. And that's been the case and will continue to be the case irrespective of what U.S. foreign policy is in the Western Hemisphere or irrespective of what happens in Ukraine. Those things can influence the timeline or the calculus, but Xi Jinping is already determined to threaten Taiwan. And so the answer to your question of what should give us hope that we aren't encouraging China to take action? The answer is deterrence. That means that we have to demonstrate, when I say we, I mean Japan, just as much as the United States, and of course Taiwan itself. I would add Australia to that mix. These friendly countries need to demonstrate that they have the capability to defend Taiwan and that they have the resolve to defend Taiwan. That is the only thing that will dissuade Xi Jinping from moving to annex Taiwan. It is deterrence, military capability, as well as economic leverage, and also the resolve to use that leverage. If Xi Jinping believes that we have sufficient military power and that we have the resolve to use it, and especially if we're willing to use it collectively, Xi Jinping will refrain from going to war.
Okay, thank you very much. You are going to the Taiwan following the day, so your message would be welcome to the Taiwan people. Thank you very much. Yes, one question that is not covered by the questionnaires, but you, the one who settled the dialogue between the North Korea and the United States. So how did you do it? So what is the key to make such kind of occasion between the
to inaugurate a dialogue?
Right.
Well, it's interesting. President Trump pursued what I thought was a reasonably effective North Korea policy in the first term. What he did, he gave us instructions at the very beginning of the first Trump administration to do a policy review, to look at the history of American policy towards North Korea and to look at what was failing, why it was failing, and what options he should consider. And what we found was that the United States had fallen into a self-defeating pattern of soft steps, lots of carrots, giving the North Koreans access to the world economy, removing sanctions or refraining from applying hard sanctions, giving North Korea food aid and energy aid, and very little in the way of sticks. That was not successful. And at the same time, the U.S. had fallen into a pattern of middle-level diplomacy with North Korea. So it'd send mid-level diplomats who would make their careers flying all over the world and going to meet North Koreans in beautiful hotels around the world. And this mix of carrots to North Korea and low-power diplomacy was an abject failure. The more we did that, the more progress North Korea would make towards expanding its nuclear arsenal. President Trump chose a policy option that reversed that approach. What he said was, we're going to use sticks, not carrots, maximum pressure, and he imposed the most significant tariff, or rather sanctions regime on North Korea that country had ever faced since the Korean War. He cut off some of the flow of oil into North Korea by pressuring China to restrict its flow of oil. He cut off the flow of North Korean exports of labor, mostly slave labor, going to Russia and China. He at least secured commitments by those countries not to allow the labor, although they've violated that. He cut off the flow of seafood exports and coal and other mineral exports. But at the same time, he left the door open for dialogue, and not just any dialogue, but leader-to-leader dialogue. President Trump determined that there's only one person in the North Korean system who can make any decision of any consequence, and that is the dictator himself. So President Trump did maximum pressure simultaneous to talks. Now, that did not lead to Kim Jong-un giving up his nuclear arsenal. What it did do was constrain Kim Jong-un's access to the resources he needs to more easily continue expanding his military. Now, it's only been in the last couple of years that has begun to really unravel due to Russia's war in Ukraine and the fact that Russia is now giving significant support to the North Korean regime, military support, technology support, probably other forms of support, in return for North Korea sending artillery shells and ballistic missiles and young men to go die on the fields of Europe fighting for Russia. So we'll see what President Trump's policy is, but I think it will be heavily informed by the experience of his first-term North Korea policy.
Thank you very much for the mention of North Korea, because family of the abduction victims now are very old, so we have to seek for the good channel to negotiate with North Korea.
Right.
Thank you very much for your advice. And the next question is Quad. I'm interested in learning your views on the potential impact on the Quad framework. Do you expect President Trump would continue this arrangement or even straighten it? How about the Quad?
Look, he was a supporter of the Quad in his first term. When the Quad has been slow, it's usually been because of Australia, and that has not been the case for many years. It's been a long time since Australia was unwilling to support the Quad. So I think now that Australia is no longer the weak link, I think there's opportunity for President Trump to support a leader-level meeting. If you look, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, one of the first meetings he had, maybe it was the first foreign meeting he had as Secretary of State, was to host a Quad meeting at the Department of State with the ministers of Australia, Japan, and India. So I think we already have an answer that the new Trump administration is a supporter of the Quad.
Thank you very much. Because if President Trump was the interest is focusing on the Western-Hemisphere, Quad is it's not so interested for him on him. And so next question is that tariff. What is the impact of President Trump's tariff trade policy on the world trade system? Does it damage a rule-based trade system under the WTO? Yes, this is not your field, but yes, as watcher of the President Trump, we think that President Trump is the 3T, the tariff man and tax cut and tough negotiation. So 3T. So your
3 R's and 3 T's.
No. I say so that your framework, the 3 R, is very new and very enlightening for us. How about the reciprocity of the WTO or the trade negotiation? Yeah.
Well, sadly, the WTO was destroyed when the People's Republic of China came in to that body and failed to keep most of its promises. And so the WTO has not been functioning for many, many years now. Unfortunately, organizations like the WTO really only work when they are dominated by countries that have a rule of law. When you have mercantilist countries that do not enjoy the rule of law, especially when they're big countries like China, it becomes untenable. So if the WTO was sort of the world was balancing on a surfboard for WTO, and then it brought China in, and China was like a hippopotamus stepping on to the one end of the surfboard. And as a result, everyone ended up underwater. So the World Trade System has been, or at least the World Trade Organization, was really ruined decades ago now by the People's Republic of China. I think what President Trump's doing could lead to people revisiting global trade efforts by starting from a new starting point, one in which the United States establishes reciprocal trade ties and then seeks to build coalitions. The opportunity will be after President Trump establishes these reciprocal tariffs on countries around the world. Countries can try to negotiate a new order with President Trump, one that lowers trade barriers, but that does so reciprocally, and one that allows for increased trade between rule of law societies, and one that excludes from the rulemaking and enforcement bodies countries that do not have the rule of law. It doesn't make any sense to have countries that don't have rule of law governing bodies like the WTO. We've now proved that it does not work. So you're going to see a period of disruption with President Trump imposing tariffs reciprocally, but then that creates a new baseline to try to build something new that should start just like, remember, before China was in the WTO, before most countries were in the WTO, you had a general agreement on tariffs and trade, a GATT. You start again, but with dependable, non-aggressive dictatorships that get to enjoy the fruits of free and open trade. And I think that's the opportunity that we should be looking at, which is one step beyond the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump is going to pursue here shortly.